You're listening to Signals from the Core, a podcast about adventuring in the core sector of the Mongoose Traveller 2nd Edition role-playing game. This is where the bureaucracy is dangerous, the nobles are lethal, and where power, paranoia, and prestige collide. I'm Captain Aurelius, and I'll be your host. In each episode, we explore the tangled heart of the Third Imperium through original story hooks, people of interest, encounters, locations, and the tools you need to bring high-stakes, low-trust campaigns to life. If your crew is headed for the throne world, buckle up, because here in the core, secrets don't stay buried. Not for long. Hello, travelers. I join you this week, travel-weary myself and a bit burnt out and exhausted, if I'm being honest. I just got back from a lengthy business trip and have been buried with work projects and deadlines for what seems like ages, weeks now. And I haven't had a lot of time to prepare for the episode. But the show must go on. I can't fall into the habit of postponing episodes because I'm too busy. That's a slippery slope I'm all too familiar with, and we're not going to do it again. So I thought it'd be a good time to do another review of one of the 3 core adventures by Mongoose. Today we'll look at Last Call at Eneri's Cantina, which is core adventure number 2. And because it's sort of a natural springboard into what I'd like to talk about today, we'll actually lead the episode off with it. But first, before we get started, if you'd like to share thoughts with me on the show, or any of your ideas for it, drop me a line at coresignalsmail@gmail.com, or follow me at signalsfromthecore.bsky.social over on Blue Sky. Both of these addresses will be in the show notes. Don't you fret about that. Learned my lesson long ago, and you can find it every episode in the show notes. You'll also find a link to a new thing I'm doing, or at least doing as time permits. I'm calling it Core Signals Dispatches, and that's over at signalsfromthecore.micro.blog, where I'm posting a traveler news service wire kind of out of Capital. So check that out for a little added tie-in to the show. And please, don't forget to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It really, really helps me out. And I appreciate anyone who takes the time to rate and review the show, which gives it a little bit of a boost, increases the visibility, and hopefully keeps the show growing. The more the show grows, the more successful it is, the more motivated I feel to do the episodes. And so, if please consider doing that. I've actually got a recent review I want to share with you today because reading it made me feel good. And, well, I thought, why not share with other listeners some of the kind words I've received? Especially, I'm asking folks to review the show if they like it. And I thought, well, okay, when I get a review, maybe share it here on the show. So I'll just read it to you. This one is titled Unmissable. It was posted about a week or so ago. 5-star review posted by Mystic Womble. And he says, Captain Aurelius takes us deeper into the heart of one of the world's most enduring role-playing games, Traveller, bringing sharp, playable insights for games focused on the power hub of the Third Imperium and beyond. Signals from the Core is a referee's dream. Stay sharp, travelers. Thank you so much for that, Mystic Womble. I truly, truly appreciate it. And anyone who takes the time to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, I truly appreciate you. I appreciate all of the listeners and everyone who follows me on social and interacts with me online. You've all been so gracious and kind and welcoming. And I really can't thank you all enough. It makes it easy to do the show, even on weekends like this, where I honestly feel a little too tired and burnt out to do it. But damn it, I'm going to do it anyway because I love doing it and I love interacting with you all. And the thought of disappointing you by not releasing a show or disappointing myself by not releasing a show is just a little too much. So anyway, thank you so much. That's enough from me. Let's get on with the show. So, as I said, today we'll look at core adventure number 2, Last Call at Eneri's Cantina, my review / overview of the adventure. We'll start by reading from the back cover. It says, Eneri's Cantina at Affinity Highport is the quintessential starport bar where adventures begin, patrons are met, rumors are heard, and wary travelers wind down after weeks in jump space. It is a place to get a good stiff drink and have the chance to rub elbows with the movers and shakers of the Sylean Main. The winds of change are blowing in the region, and the high-tech industrial world of Ace is making moves to establish itself as a power broker. Unfortunately for Affinity, and worlds like it, they might become casualties of Ace's master plan. But such is life in the politically charged high-stakes core where everything is done on a grand winner-take-all scale. The travelers become embroiled in these events even though all they really want to do is save their favorite bar. They become pawns in a dangerous political game that might forever change not just Affinity, but an entire way of life, and not for the better. If they play their cards right, they might just find the key to saving Eneri's Cantina and preserving the things they hold dear. Last Call at Eneri's Cantina includes deck plans, rules, and an illustration of Affinity Highport, a new spacecraft, the Ramiak Kihildru, and a new vehicle, the Sea Skimmer. Also includes a world map and animal encounters for the wild water world of Affinity. I'm going to have fun with this one because it's actually the first adventure set in the core that I ran. Interestingly enough, I think interestingly enough. And so I thought, let's just share it. Let's review it. Let's talk about it, and then talk about, in keeping with some of the themes that I have talked about in previous episodes, how you can use published material to expand upon it and really sort of run a sandbox out of some of the materials published and provided by Mongoose, or I mean, really any, this goes beyond Traveller. Any published material you can kind of take and build upon and spin out. And I think Last Call at Eneri's Cantina provides a platform to do that really, really well, which we'll get into today. Written by Christopher Griffen and published by Mongoose in 2023, the module comes in at just 48 pages, but like I said, due to some unique structuring, Last Call at Eneri's Cantina can provide an entire campaign's worth of gameplay in what I consider to be one of the core sector's most fun and interesting areas of the setting. The primary objective for the travelers is to save their favorite starport bar, Eneri's Cantina, from being shut down or co-opted. This goal rapidly escalates into a high-stakes political mission to stop or support, if you prefer, an authoritarian world from forcibly raising the law levels of subsidiary worlds along the prestigious Sylean Main. which is the Jump 1 trade artery that's the spine of the core sector. Eneri's Cantina is the local watering hole run by the welcoming Zash Pemzirma at Affinity Highport, which is a bustling and chaotic trade hub on the Sylean Main in orbit above Affinity, an inhospitable waterworld. It's got no real local government, a low law level, and a reputation as the kind of place where cargo, gossip, and employment all flow with minimum friction. ACE, the high-tech industrial world that administers Affinity as a subsidiary, wants that to end. The region's political winds are shifting, and ACE is attempting to establish itself as a dominant power broker in the core sector. And in the moot, it's depicting the Sylean Main as a lawless, blighted swath of space filled with insurgents. To curb this, the Resource Concordat, which is ruling the ACE system, is pushing a legislative measure called the Justice for All Initiative. If passed, all subsidiary captive worlds along the main, such as Affinity, will be forcibly subjected to the draconian law levels of their owning worlds, drastically reducing personal freedoms. While ACE publicly claims the point of the initiative is to bring quote-unquote additional security and prosperity to the region they depict as a lawless haven for insurgents and terrorists, their true motives are a massive political and economic power grab. The actual goals of the initiative are to dominate the Sylean Main. The initiative's author, ACE's ruling Resource Concordat, like I mentioned before, intends to use this newfound legal authority to establish itself as the supreme political and financial power in the region. And they want to control interstellar trade. Their ambitions go beyond local law enforcement. They ultimately want to seize control of trade and travel. By framing the freewheeling worlds as security threats, ACE hopes to bypass the imperial guarantee of free trade. They plan to force travelers and merchants to register their ships, pay new taxes and duties, and submit to a sprawling new bureaucracy entirely controlled by ACE, allowing them to heavily profit off the region's commerce. And they really want to set an authoritarian precedent, and other authoritarian governments in the core sector are eagerly watching this legislation, because if passed, it would create a legal precedent allowing them to impose their own strict laws on their subsidiary worlds, which drastically would reduce personal freedoms, self-determination across the entire sector. ACE soon begins pouring security forces and paramilitaries into Affinity, transforming the freewheeling starport into a tense, heavily policed zone, kind of a powder keg. The module is uniquely structured with a kind of demanding, but actually I think more fun and exciting built-in prologue. Before the main plot even kicks off, the adventure provides a series of diverse patron encounters, ranging from transporting delicate Sylean liquors to participating in underground boxing matches. It kind of allows the travelers to establish Eneri as their home base over several gaming sessions. And I actually think this is a huge opportunity, like I was saying at the top, to extend this for as long as you want, treat it as a sandbox. And while the published adventure provides a handful of prologue patron encounters and jobs, I would encourage you to keep that going as long as you can and really use Affinity Starport before you kick off the main adventure for as long as it's fun for your players. Because this could be the launch pad for a number of thrilling, fun, interesting adventures in, like I said, a very fun, interesting area of space, which we'll get into later in the episode after the review of just how rich and fun this area of space can be for a lot of different reasons that we'll get into. There's just a lot going on in this in the region of space where this takes place, which I will tell you is the sector just below, the subsector just below the core subsector where capital is. So it's just below that in a subsector called Chant. And it is just a really great place to set adventures. And I think the setup of this module can take you a long way and then land on a really fun and interesting note when you complete the adventure anyway. But I digress. Let's get back to the review. The main adventure begins when Zash's adopted son, Calgo, goes missing on the wild, stormy waterworld of Affinity below. What starts as a search and rescue mission quickly embroils the travelers in a starport-wide riot, as martial law is declared and the high port goes onto lockdown. Travelers are forced to choose sides among competing factions. Ultimately, the fate of Eneri's Cantina becomes a microcosm for the fate of the entire Sylean Main, leading to the high-stakes political showdown. From a referee's perspective, Last Call at Eneri's Cantina offers a highly dynamic, politically charged sandbox that rewards role-playing and long-term player investment. Like I was saying, like really get in this. Let them feel this area of space so that when the stakes are raised and Ace plays its cards and really sends these jackbooted thugs onto the high port, it hits close to home for the travelers, and it doesn't feel so contrived or like they can just be like, I'm going to bail. I don't care. We don't need this problem. It really gives you the opportunity to use this as a home base to run a lot of Radiant campaigns and emergent storytelling right out of Affinity, or in the area of space, keep them coming back to Affinity, where that's where the jobs pay off. Even if they picked up the job on a different planet, all roads could lead back to Affinity. Just keep them going back there and have them stop over at Eneri's Cantina while they're getting their ship taken care of, looked at, while cargo's getting unloaded. This really build toward that long-term player investment. The adventure's biggest strength is that requirement to play out the prologue organically. By having the players complete these unrelated jobs and frequently return to the cantina to grab a drink from a robot bartender or the patron, Zash at the end of the day, even have them meet Caligo, right? Because he is at the bar helping his mother run things, right? Have it really be that they build that genuine emotional attachment to the location, to the NPCs, so that when Zash eventually comes to them, it's a no-brainer for them to take that job on, right? So that when the bar is eventually threatened, they're just motivated to fight back, and it becomes this grand political plot that is also deeply personal. I can say that when I played this, one of my players had a contact who they chose to be an uncle, and I just had the uncle on Affinity working there, who also had close ties to Zash, so that just increased the stakes, increased the attachment, so that it wasn't just kind of them meeting Zash. there was already a connection there. So it was also a favor for the uncle. So always keep that in mind too. Your players' connections that they build throughout character creation. You could tie that in here with affinity as well, to use this as a really easy starting point to launch a campaign. If you're curious, if you thought about how would I ever run a campaign or an adventure in core, this is a fantastic example of how to do that. We talked about invasive species on the last episode as a great one shot that you could use to build connectors coming out of it. This one, you could use it as more than a one shot, right? This could be a mini campaign in and of itself, kind of graduating from that first adventure. The other thing that I like about this one is that it doesn't really force players into a linear path, right? When the political situation boils over, they get approached by 3 distinct factions and they can choose who they want to side with, who do they want to work with. You've got the Yersh Poi Syndicate, which is led by mob boss Sinture, who wants the travelers to take over Eneri's Cantina as a front for money laundering and use it for their own kind of nefarious purposes and black market dealings, which they think are going to ramp up if authoritarian rule is placed in the region. There's going to be a more vibrant, lucrative black market because of the oppression that will be felt around trade that leads to opportunity, and they want to work with the travelers to make that happen. Then you've also got the Asai security forces led by Commandant Perry, who offers the travelers vast wealth, up to 2 mega credits, if the travelers help Ace secure their plan and their authoritarian grip over the region, over the entire Sylean Main. They'll cut them in on the deal. And then you've got the local resistance, spearheaded by Seneschal Uivi, who want the travelers to recruit his employer, a Countess Trenard, to vote against the legislation, and she holds a lot of sway in the moot. You just have to jump through some hoops to get her on board. So that's a fun little, call it side adventure. A fun little, it's not a side adventure, it's just a chapter of the adventure. And it's fun too because the travelers will face all sorts of challenges and obstacles throughout the course of this. Even before the imbroglio happens on the high port, they got to do the search and rescue mission on Affinity to rescue Caligo. It's a volatile water world with extreme weather, rogue waves, shifting transitory islands, and highly unpredictable tides. It's really, it's kind of a survival mission. Then you've got the criminal elements where you've got to rescue Caligo from the syndicate of mobsters who are attempting to assassinate him because he owes them gambling debts. And so, it's not like he's just lost on a fishing trip. There's some stuff going on here because of the hot water he's gotten himself in that you got to bail him out of. That has stakes too. Then, of course, you got the martial law and the riots on Affinity Highport once you get back up there from doing the mission to rescue Caligo, where you got this whole starport-wide riot, and you got to navigate between the military police and trigger-happy paramilitaries that the SI law enforcement have sent in to also just kind of ramp up tensions. So you've got rioters across all 3 high port decks. And then on the mission to recruit the noble that I was talking about just a minute ago, you've got to locate a hidden asteroid base. And then once you've found it, you've got this social challenge of persuading her to utilize all her political proxies, which she's hoarding. She's kind of her own little mini power broker. But at the same time, you've got Asai agents after you and kind of wanting to take you out, take her out, so she can't vote against them. It's really, like I said, it's a powder keg. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of fun stuff going on in this. We talked about some of the characters, but it's also, I love the characters and villains in this. You've got Zash Pamzirma, who I already kind of talked about, welcoming Cantina owner, who you should really leverage, amp up. Like I said earlier, I built her in with a connection to the Travelers to just make her seem more important due to a connection that already meant something to one of my players. Then you've got Caligo, who's actually also a human Hakar hybrid. He's a chimera. And like I said, he's got those gambling debts that triggered the adventure's main events, where he's gotten himself into some hot water. You got to bail him out. That leads to complications. Then there's Bug. He's this bartender robot, and he's a fun character too. He'll violently eject unruly patrons, and he's got this kind of off-kilter conversational canned responses that don't quite fit right, which you can play around with and add some color to it. And then there's that Countess Vandia Tranard, she's that eccentric noble who's hoarding those voting proxies, and has a hidden base. This she calls the Renegade Roost, which is a hollowed out asteroid. It's a lot. It's fun. It's a lot going on. Some really fascinating, creative areas of play in this one, and kudos to Griffen for what he came up with here. Players, I always think in terms of why players would want to play in this and why a referee would want to run it, right? And so I think players would want to participate because it takes that sort of RPG, the role-playing trope of starting in a tavern, and provides immense agency over its fate. So it's not just a tavern that you use as a trope. It's a tavern that you can build a real affinity for. Pun intended. Sorry, I did it. But, once you've established the Cantina as the home base for not only the preliminary encounters, like the boxing matches, the artifacts, smuggling runs, and like I said, I really encourage you, run more than just the ones that are published in the adventure. Come up with your own table of other adventures that you can do. And I think on the next episode, I want to kind of talk about sort of some of the traditional ways you could play Traveller set in the core, which would make slot-ins to this a lot easier. So not to get ahead of myself, but I've been thinking a lot about that as well, like, because I get questions a lot, like, I like traditional Traveller adventures, but I kind of want to play in the core. How could a traditional Traveller adventure play out in the core? Well, this is one of the ways. Using something like this is a way to sort of do that. And then we'll, like I said, I'm getting ahead of myself, but we'll get into that on the next episode as well. But the idea is take your time, build that genuine emotional investment. And I think the players would really appreciate that and appreciate a place like Affinity. And also, hey, there's a lot of cool, interesting stuff happening on Affinity. And like I said, in the nearby sector where a lot of cool things can happen. And this reminds me, we've talked about Anther, which is part of the Singularity campaign in that region of space, and how that got a lot of great documentation as part of that Kickstarter. That's all right in the same sort of region. So you could build your own little circuit for your travelers between Affinity and Anther, Highport, and some of the other areas of space, and have them do their own little sort of circuit of jobs, taking on odd jobs or side jobs, or off the beaten path jobs, filling in the blanks, and just have them continuing to come back to Affinity as a way to build that personal connection. And then at the end, ultimately too, there's that player agency too, which I think that they will appreciate, where ultimately they have the freedom to pick sides here on how they want to save Affinity, save the bar, or align with, God help you if you've got players who want to side with an authoritarian regime, but they could do it. They could also, though, if they fail it, align with the Yersh Poi syndicate and have some, if they've got criminal leanings that don't lead all the way toward that authoritarianism, but they're more shady, they want to do some smuggling, they want to deal with the black market and the underworld, they could always side with the syndicate as well. It's up to them how they want this to play out. And as for why a referee would want to run it, like I've noted, not to sound like a broken record, but it's a phenomenal anchor for a core sector campaign. And it transitions between all sorts of gameplay pillars, from investigation, wilderness survival, riot navigation, political debate, and that search and rescue. You got to find the hidden base. You got a hidden base. You've got a wilderness survival, a Highport riot with authoritarian thugs who just look the part. You know what I mean? The high boots, the black uniforms, the real kind of stark looking people. If this was on YouTube, I could show you the picture of what they look like, but they look the part. You know what I mean? The other cool thing is you got great deck plans for Affinity Highport. You got a rumors and lies table to flesh out the sandbox, which you could use to kind of build your own, like I'm always talking about, build your own tables, create some tables, random rolls, emergent storytelling. This is a great platform for that. So if you're a referee who loves that sort of thing, like I do, this is a great, great adventure. And so, yeah, outstanding for groups that enjoy that immersive role-playing, emergent storytelling, political intrigue, having that home base to defend or launch missions from. It's just a great anchor to ground yourselves in building a core sector campaign, and provides plenty of latitude to expand and build upon the module in the lead up to the imbroglio. It's truly a great platform for that sandbox style campaign. I mean, like I said, one of the most fascinating regions of the entire sector, which is Chant, which leads us to the next segment where I'm going to tell you a lot more about Chant. So we've done system spotlights before, but I don't know that I've ever done a whole subsector spotlight. But I'm going to try one today. And I paraphrased a lot of this from a lot of different sources. Chant is an area of space that Griffen has written about heavily, right? From Third Imperium sourcebook, some of the Singularity support materials, through, I think, even some of his articles in the Journal of the Traveller's Aid Society ties into this area of space. He's clearly fleshed a lot of this out and given a lot of room for creativity and ideas and cool stuff happening in this subsector. And I'm calling this Chant a history of devastation and decline. It's often referred to as the sick man of the core and likened to the picked over remains of a carcass. That's from some of the source materials. Chant is a shadow of its former self. Despite being settled over 7,000 years, its current population of 13.7 billion is a mere fraction of its peak, when it hosted over 14 times as many people. The subsector was devastated by a sequence of ecological collapses, relentless warfare, and the dark age of the long night, and the catastrophic plague of Duskir, which wiped out billions of its Villani inhabitants. Today, ruins of lost civilizations are ubiquitous on worlds like Merat, Avthos, and Efinity. Sprawling ancient ruins sit alongside modern imperial structures or have been reclaimed entirely by deserts and marshes, forcing new settlements to spring up in the temperate latitudes. The continuous rimward decline of the subsector is attributed to several ongoing factors, like systemic corruption, rampant corruption, nepotism, and cronyism, which have all stifled growth in the region. Astrography and isolation. The subsector is boxed in by stellar gaps and bordered by the stubbornly isolationist Chanastan worlds of the Dunea subsector, which restricts the flow of trade and information. Then you've got corporate monopolies and the efforts of megacorporations to eliminate smaller, independent shipping lines, which has actively diminished opportunities for economic advancement in Chant's underserved regions. But there are rejuvenation efforts afoot, and with them, additional opportunities for corruption. But because an economic disaster so close to capital is viewed as an unacceptable public relations nightmare, massive efforts are underway to save Chant. The subsector has managed to retain several Class A and Class B starports via imperial subsidies, and industrial giants like Skeen and Rami have all pledged support. Achenar Antilles has opened a new hub to reinvigorate trade. Emperor Strephon has invested his own personal wealth into the region as well, while also simultaneously soliciting trillions more from megacorporations. So he has made this a priority. And in doing so has started the Chant Subsector Rejuvenation Project, or CSRP. And the CSRP is headquartered at the newly upgraded Class A starport on Anther Highport, which, like I said, great supplemental material as part of the Singularity campaign there's an entire, I guess, chapter now in the Singularity Companion on Anther. That headquarter leads these efforts from Anther, and the CSRP uses economic evangelism and deploys PR outrider teams, quote unquote, to convince traders to visit neglected worlds, help locals make their markets more attractive, and to further stimulate the economy. The Salo merchant line was recently granted a free trade zone charter to service the ailing Basiling cluster located in the subsector. However, like I said, with this rejuvenation effort comes a lot of opportunity for corruption, and, well, this well-funded bureaucracy is, you might not be surprised to learn, heavily compromised. Embezzlers, hackers with backdoor access, actively raiding the relief funds for their own gain is happening, which is rife with potential for jobs for travelers on either side of the equation. If they're goody two-shoes, you could play it that way. If they're kind of criminal scum on their own, you could play it that way. There's a lot of latitude here, but it's fun, rich, interesting. Love this area of space. Then you've got piracy, and what I'm calling this kind of, well, I think the source material calls it too, but I've adopted it, this light touch military, because with as much money that's flowing into the subsector to revitalize it, ironically, the military presence here is underfunded. So the economic strife has given, predictably, rise to rampant piracy. And the Navy's second fleet, the Imperial Navy's second fleet, which is tasked with defending the subsector, is severely under-resourced. And it consists of only 3 underfunded squadrons flying outdated ships that desperately need refitting. And rather than deploying overwhelming force to crush the pirates, which would cause an embarrassing spectacle so close to capital, they're taking a different approach. The Navy employs this quote unquote light touch, where they're focused more on winning hearts and minds, that old trope, in hope that the CSRP's efforts will eventually provide the economic alternatives to piracy. So that's a little bit of a kind of back and forth seesaw situation that you could deal with as well, with piracy going on. There's also a fun, and we talked about this when I was looking at the Journal of the Traveler's Aid Society, the most fun articles for use in the core, the most useful articles from those volumes for use in the core, where, and this is the area of space where this happens a lot. I'm talking about Code Duello. So you've got this culture and politics, social card being played here too, where the grinding poverty and proximity to wealth at capital have created this contentious political environment, especially among the nobility. And so Chant has adopted the old notion of Code Duello, which, unlike the rest of core, where formal dueling is frowned upon, duels in Chant are remarkably more frequent and considerably more violent. And while killing is avoided, the nastiness between noble houses frequently results in small private wars between household troops, the Huskarls, driven by competition over resources that are becoming more and more scarce. And then you've got, on top of that, these centuries-old grudges and rivalries that date back to the Chanastan War. People are just dueling. They're out there dueling, which I just think is a fun aspect of this area too. There's a lot you could play with that. Then I mentioned the Chenastin area. You've got Chenastin sympathizers. The rimward portion of the subsector, particularly these 9 white star clusters, what's called the white star cluster, 9 systems that all are sympathetic to the separatist Chenastin movement. And 4 of the worlds hold noble ranks of Baron or higher, which makes their votes and influence even more important in the moot. So there's a lot to juggle there too, but you've got Rydino, Rebel, which is spelled Wrebil, but I pronounce it Rebel, Tra, and Komodo. Those 4 of the 8 white star cluster are kind of the more powerful planets that all lean heavily toward Chenastin separatist sympathies, right? So, like I said, powder keg in this region of space. I had someone one time ask me, how could you play Firefly in the core? And I'm like, are you kidding me? I find it's super easy to play Firefly style campaigns in this area of space, because you got to remember, the thing about Firefly was it was not a vast region of space like Traveller, right? It was a far smaller area. So to me, and I can explain this on a future episode, maybe even the next episode, this area of space, Chant and Core, those 2 subsectors, really lend themselves well because of the diverse types of planets going on here, from high tech to backwater. You got a lot of from really affluent and robust commercial success, opulence, and then really poor, downtrodden areas right in a tight area of space that you could easily kind of play that upstairs, downstairs sort of plot. So let's look at some of the key worlds of the subsector. You've got Chant, that's the main world, the namesake of the subsector, which is this desert world of 9 million farmers with a highly unusual ecology because of dry storms and scorching surface. Life mostly thrives underground around aquifers. Plant life utilizes retinal instead of chlorophyll, making the flora purple, lavender, and pink. The Duke of Chant, Maglato Otori, is a dilettante who nonetheless is a devout champion of the subsector and maintains an estate here, though he spends most of his time at the subsector capital of Vurin, which I think is how you say it, Vvrin, Vurin, or he's on capital. The Chant system also hosts the Chant Way Station, a major hub for interstellar communications. Then you've got Anther, which we talked about already, which is this airless rock ball, but due to the high port and recently upgraded, it's the cerebral cortex of the core, sitting astride the Sylean Main, and with 6 intersecting X-boat routes. And as mentioned previously, ground zero for the CSRP and the headquarters. Oh, it's also the headquarters of Achenar Antilles in the area. Achenar Antilles is home base is actually on a different planet in a different subsector, but in this area, Anther also maintains one of their satellite headquarters. It's like I said, starport was recently upgraded to a Sterling Class A facility, making it the finest maintenance and shipyard hub in Chant, and arguably, in close proximity to Core as well. One of the top high ports. Then we've got Farhome, which is a bleak, failing colony world with a declining population and low tech level. Surprisingly, it is the birthplace of alt dirge, which is a massively popular musical genre, played with an accordion, acoustic guitar, bass drum, snare, and a horn. Alt dirge features depressing lyrics about financial ruin and barren worlds. The famous band No Prospects has even used it to protest the corrupt imperial bureaucrats they blame for their suffering. Farhome's two asteroid belts, Winsome and Stoneyard, are currently the site of intense political sabotage orchestrated by foreign nobles trying to prevent the world from gaining a barony and kind of bouncing back. So Farhome, like I said, Firefly-esque opportunities. Look no further than Farhome. It even kind of sounds like it could have come from Firefly. Then Tra, which I mentioned earlier, once a heavily mined asteroid belt. Tra's hollowed out planetoids have been converted into an artificial resort destination featuring amusement parks, zoos, spas, and pleasure asteroids. Tra's high-tech shipyard is known for building custom civilian spacecraft equipped with borderline illegal military features. So think of the fun things you could do with that one. Then Rebel, which we talked about just briefly, historically the site of an elite, secretive psionic training institute called the Keep. During the psionic suppressions of the early 800s, the Scions violently resisted closure, resulting in a bloody, lethal confrontation with the Imperial Marines. There's a lot of stuff you could do there. And then we've got Skeen, which is the dominant industrial power of the Rimward Chant branch of the Sylean Main, the owner of the subsidiary world Akin Akun. And while publicly it's part of the revitalization effort, Skeen's industrial interests play dirty. They secretly hire mercenaries and pirates to plague neighboring regions like Prubisk to maintain the status quo and secure their monopoly over the regional development. So just a few areas that I think are hotbeds or opportunity to launch jobs and storylines and adventures from. But we've got one more. And this will lead to our system spotlight for the episode. It is the planet Tel, and it is fascinating. So coming up, a system spotlight. So Tel obviously sits in the Chant subsector. It's a water world of almost nothing but ocean beneath a dense, breathable sky. Its UWP reads A78A472F. And the numbers, when I saw this, when I was looking at kind of planets, UWPs, and kind of thinking through, I saw that F, and then I saw the 2 and the 7. I was like, what is going on here? And the population, right, of 4. I was like, the numbers are arguing with each other in a lot of ways, which is one of the best, most fun and entertaining parts of Traveller, as I've mentioned before, is interpreting these UWPs. So let's break it down, right? Starport A, okay. Size 7, it's about 11,000 kilometers in diameter, slightly smaller than Terra. Atmosphere of 8, it's a dense atmosphere, breathable without assistance, and comfortable for long-term habitation. Not great, but not bad. Hydrographics is A, 10, virtually 100% water covered. Land consists of tiny islands, reefs, floating habitats, or artificial structures. That's from the source materials. Population of 4, which is roughly 10,000 to 99,999 inhabitants. So more than 10,000, less than 100,000, which is a remarkably small population. Especially when you consider the government is 7, which is balkanized. No effective world government. Multiple competing political entities. What? Law level is 2, fairly permissive, few restrictions on civilian weapons or personal freedoms. And then the tech level is F, 15. And so I looked in the source materials in the Imperial, in the Third Imperium source book, looking for some information on Tel. It's not there. And I was like, oh, playground. Love this. Love this. Because one of the other times that I found a similar UWP, it was about Sabsea, and then it all made sense because small population, high tech, but it's a military research area. So this, I thought, we're going to have some fun with this. And so that's why I decided I wanted to do a system spotlight on Tel because of what I've come up with for this. So we've got the Class A starport with a full shipyard, TL-15 installations. It's also got an Imperial naval base on the planet as well. But like I said, there's nothing that says it's all naval base, right? So I thought, okay, well, it's got a naval base, but there's more going on here. I used the World Builder's Handbook to flesh out the population a little bit more and rolled 86,000, and then I embellished 412. So the roll, like I broke down last time, you can kind of break it down to, roll a D3, come up with the first number, like the population value, the P value, which I rolled a 6 and a 2, that makes an 8, and then you roll a D10, and I got a 6, so that's 86,000, and then I don't like 86,000, so I just tacked on 412. So 86,412, that's the population. Facilities that ought to sit beneath millions instead answer to tens of thousands. So the world exists to solve Chant's problem. The subsector is dying, like we just talked about, and it's propped up by Imperial subsidy and patrolled by the underfunded Second Fleet. And the Chant subsector rejuvenation project is the Imperium's attempt to reverse that slide, right? One of the answers to that is here on Tel. And that is to gather the finest technology corporations in the entire core sector into one place, hand them state-of-the-art facilities and TL-15 laboratories for a pittance. Set them loose on a single question. What would it take to turn things around in Chant? What could be produced in Chant that the wider Imperium would want to buy and that we could export from here and increase trade and trade, commerce. Tel is the think tank at the heart of that gamble. The work is prototyping and advanced research and development aimed at products that could one day be mass produced across the subsector and exported outward, with core foremost among the markets, core subsector, and capital. A world of tens of thousands, if it invents the right thing, can lift millions. And so then how do you solve for the balkanization, right? Well, I didn't roll for this. I just looked at it and I was like, okay, well, balkanization, what do we want to do? So it's all corporations. 4 corporate enclaves. Each one is a research house of top rank, top tier, invited to tell because it's among the best in its field anywhere in the sector. The Imperium built the world and subsidizes it right down to the water people drink and the filtration systems, the electricity and the energy. There's a dedicated bureaucratic apparatus that keeps everything afloat. No pun intended. Well, pun intended. Yeah, let's be honest. The power flowing, the supply ships arriving, so that the people who matter here never have to think about any of it. They were brought here to tell, to invent, and everything else is handled for them. What the enclaves share is the Class A starport, the machinery of the imperial patronage that makes their presence possible. But what divides them is that each is a rival, chasing the same prestige and the same eventual export fortunes, and none of them shares a breakthrough a day before they have to. Each guards its own things and secrets, with private security forces answerable only to their own boardrooms. And this is where the balkanization kind of comes in. There's like their own kind of private enclave, right? Their own private nation in a way. And they treat each other as threats and have the forces to stop those threats. Espionage between the enclaves is constant and assumed always, even where it's not provable. It's assumed that there's espionage happening. And that's just the background condition of doing business on Tel. So you've got these whole private armies, security forces that, would just be like armies of warring nation states. It's just, these are corporations. And the organizations here are the most ambitious engineering, some of the most ambitious engineering in the entire subsector. We've got Onasi Tellurian pushing jump theory and gravitics against the edge of what the Imperium even currently understands. Bellershon pulling materials and biotech out of the deep ocean that exists nowhere else. Correnti building autonomous systems meant to do the work of populations Chant doesn't even have anymore. Every one of these is a legitimate CSRP triumph in the making, and everyone is also worth a fortune to buyers who have nothing to do with Chant's recovery. The corporations pursue both all at the same time, because on Tel, there's no line between them. Meaning the breakthrough that saves a dying colony, a dying economy, is the same breakthrough that sells to the fleet admirals or the ministries or even rival megacorporations. And that makes the place valuable, but it's also what makes it dangerous. Most of the work clusters or is built from the downport, right, where the corporations keep all their headquarters in laboratories and their public face. It's sort of like, if you've ever played the game Mass Effect, it's like Novaria on steroids. And they all showcase their work from these headquarters. So it's this massive, it's Class A. It's huge. It's like, everybody could fit there. And there's some pageantry too, though, because these are the achievements that the CSRP puts in its reports, and they host demonstrations and stage for visiting patrons from capital who tour the facilities to kind of see their good work happening. But anything a firm would rather keep to itself moves outward onto remote platforms or submerged installations that they maintain themselves, right? Deep sea sites are the clearest example of this, and would offer some interesting adventure seeds, again, search and rescue to the deep sea, where you lose contact. Oh, you've lost contact with your deep sea. Now you have to take a submersible down and figure out what happened because you've lost contact down there. So the way I have it is, every one of the organizations here, there are like four main ones with kind of dozens of smaller companies also involved as well. But there are four pillars, I guess, the four main corporations that exist here. And because it's TL15, right, you've also got mechanized labor happening, thousands of robots, drones, autonomous facilities happening as well. So, it feels bigger and busier than the 86,412 population would first, seem. So let's talk a little bit more about the corporations, the four of them. And we'll talk about three. We'll talk about three briefly, and then I kind of did a deeper dive around a patron profile and a full corporation overview as well, which we'll get into in the next segment. But for now, I've already mentioned these three. We'll talk a little bit more in depth about what they do. Onasi Tellurian is the oldest firm on the planet, is the oldest firm that exists on the planet, and kind of carries itself like it. It's built up against, abutted with the naval base. They're very closely not tied, but the proximity, right? It's close to the naval base, and that's where it's contracted to do most of its work, right? So it does a lot of work in gravitics, jump theory, screen and damper miniaturization, naval systems, and they're just constantly pushing against the edge of what the Imperium currently understands. So they're just really trying to do breakthroughs in naval technology. And it kind of has a chip on its shoulder because it's got some resentment for getting the same subsidy terms as some of these other companies that are decades its junior. They also run really risky test programs for the drives that they're developing, the jump drives and the gravitic technology. So they have to run those tests out on deep sea platforms, not deep under sea, but out on the farthest areas of the oceans, so that they don't destroy anything important around the port, the down port. Then we've got Bellershan Hydrostatics, which works with, and these guys are doing a lot of deep sea testing and mining underwater in the deepest depths, involving everything from biotechnology to just whatever the ocean holds down there. So its downport presence is the most modest because most of its real estate on the planet is deep below the surface in those deep undersea laboratories that are the hardest sites on the planet to reach without cause, right? So they're testing everything from flora and fauna under the sea. So I'm thinking sea monsters, potentially, just a lot could go on with these guys that I'm excited to explore. And then we've got Correnti Automata, which builds machines that are designed to act on their own. Combat drones, labor units, autonomous industrial systems, and they just are they're doing most of the stuff around fully automated labs. So think robotics, think autonomous systems. That's what these guys deal in. So beyond the majors, the four major corporations sit smaller firms, independents, along with the civil workforce that keeps the base supplied and maintained. I've roughly divided the 86,412, something like 31,000 under Aeternus, which again, we'll get into more detail in a bit. About 20,000 under Onasi Tellurian, 14,000 under Correnti, 11,000 under Bellershawn, and with the remainder kind of spread among the lesser companies and port support. Naval personnel on the base rotate, and I'm counting that separately from the population. So that's not factored in. Governance is light, like we talked about, because the Imperium has kind of designed it that way. The bureaucratic apparatus that runs the world's systems has no interest in ruling its people. It maintains the downport, the Class A starport that's down here. And interestingly, that's where it's biggest and best. It's got a high port, but it's not as impressive as what's happening on the downport, because the downport is like the city, such as it is, with the, kind of all the trappings that go along with it. So you've got the corporations governing their own enclaves, however they see fit, in the port authority, in the imperial bureaucracy overseeing that, overseeing the starport, and then you've got the CSRP compliance office charged with holding the corporations kind of accountable to their work. Basically, you've got a naval liaison whose interest begins and ends at the base perimeter. They don't really concern themselves unless they need to, unless, like, I guess if war were to break out among all of the different corporations, they would get involved, but they don't really bother themselves unless they need to. The law level 2, just as a reminder, that describes the average across the enclaves, but they don't coordinate their rules. So in practice, the law is whatever it is on the platform you're standing on when they decide it. So you could have, like, if you're visiting Onasi Tellurian, things could be a lot more restrictive than what a law level 2 might suggest, right? So keep that in mind as well. But that's how I've started fleshing out Tell when I saw that UWP, and I was like, what the hell is happening here with this tech level, but this population? It's non-industrial, it's not rich, it's high tech for sure, but it's not high population. And so I found it fascinating. So I was like, well, what would this be? And then I started thinking about, that the CSRP and some fun things you could do there. And then I started thinking about Noveria and how fascinated I was when I first got there and the stuff that was going on there when I played Mass Effect. And I was like, man, that would be fantastic for this setting here in Chant, given everything that's going on there. So there you have it. Tell. Now it's time for a patron profile. This time it's Aelric Durellian. Now, I'm telling you about this patron profile before we get into the corporate profile I alluded to in the last segment, because this is the person behind Aeternus. Aelric Durellian is one of the wealthiest private citizens in the core, and arguably one of the most controversial. Worth a staggering 500 trillion credits, he's built one of the largest private fortunes in the core out of the human body, and spends it arguing that the human body isn't finished yet. His company, Aeternus, is the backbone of the core's advanced genetic and cybernetics output. It began in cellular bionics, perfecting the grafts and implants that let the wealthy replace what age and injury took without fear of scars or rejection. While most industrialists of his stature maintain a veneer of respectability, Durellian embraces notoriety, loudly, hosting symposiums showcasing his controversial products. His guests are dukes and counts, academics and adventurers, and he tells them all the same thing, that the Imperium is holding humanity back out of fear of what it might become. The conviction is genuine and not just a sales posture. The transcendence movement he heads runs as a standing invitation more than an organization. A circuit of private symposia and expos where the core's curious come to hear a man of enormous wealth say aloud what they've only thought, and where some of them buy in afterward through clinics that officially don't exist. He is a loud, visible proponent of cybernetic augmentation, genetic replication, and expanded legal recognition for clones. His critics in the moot denounce him as a dangerous radical. His admirers praise him as a visionary of humanity's future. He wants his name set beside Cleon and Arbalatra among the people who changed what the Imperium is. And he's patient and rich enough to work at it across a lifetime longer than a natural one. That truth may be more unsettling than we know for certain. Noble circles whisper that Aelric has already died at least once, that the man holding court is a graft of clone biology and cybernetic lattice carrying a dead man's memories. He certainly gets around to a degree even the fastest jump drives wouldn't allow, attending a classified briefing on Sabsi just days before a second Durellian sits in a boardroom on Nimluine, or appearing before a moot hearing on Capitol today after overseeing the latest prototype out of the top secret lab at Tel only yesterday. He does nothing to correct the story, which is kind of its own answer. There should always be a question of which Durellian a traveler is actually meeting. Some adventure hooks for Durellian. The clone heir. A batch of experimental Durellian clones has gone missing. Were they stolen, or did they run? The symposium. Durellian invites the travelers to a gala where he unveils a new augmentation, but the demonstration goes awry in ways that threaten everyone present. The double problem. Multiple Durellians appear at different points of the core simultaneously. Which is the authentic one, if any? Forbidden Archive. He claims access to a sealed Rule of Man databank containing AI transfer experiments. The Imperium wants it destroyed. Durellian will do anything to keep it. So just some thought starters there. Not fleshed out yet, but you never know. I think I'll be playing around with this and fleshing these out. But I just kind of wanted to give you a patron to go along with the company that we'll now turn to that I alluded to when we did our system spotlight on Tel. So let's take a look at Aeternus. Aeternus is the augmentation and continuity house that Aelric Durellian built on Capital, privately held and personally controlled, wealthy and far-reaching enough to sit among the imperial megacorporations, and pointedly not counted among them. It keeps two kinds of business under one roof, and it's one owner. One is a respectable industrial supplier of cellular bionics and cybernetics, and the fleet-relevant alloys and composites imperial shipyards run on, the sort of firm a duke can invest in without comment. The other does the work that keeps the Ministry of Science awake. Genetic sculpting, the continuity engines, the clone vessels, the intelligences it grows inside its clients' skulls. Both trade under the same name, and the first pays for the second and shields it. Durellian's first fortune came off cellular bionics, the grafts and implants that let the wealthy replace what age and injury took, but without scars or rejecting the grafts. By the turn of the 12th century, Aeternus had turned that money toward the rest of the body and then the mind, into pre-birth and post-birth genetic optimization, cognitive implants, and eventually the recording and modeling of a person closely enough to outlast them. The company markets the range as Ascendancy Suites under the house line Forever, Stronger, Beyond. And its officials make no secret of the ambition behind it. Where a ministry auditor sees proscribed research, Aeternus presents the engineered improvement of humanity, held back only by an Imperium afraid of its own future. Two products carry the name furthest. Cogneta, the implant-resident cognitive assistant that rides behind a client's own thoughts, has become the quiet standard among the Corps' high nobility and senior naval command, to the point that reaching such a person often means first passing through their cogneta. Then there's the executive sync mesh, which goes further, linking a handful of implanted minds into a single coordinated cluster. It sits close enough to forbidden ground that their use outside licensed corporate and military settings falls under the imperial statute covering artificial telepathy. The genetic sculpting suites are banned outright in most jurisdictions and used anyway by the houses that can pay, while the continuity engines and clone vessels are the work Aeternus never advertises plainly, but never quite denies either. That deniable end of the business lives in black rooms, and the most restricted material sits well away from capital, out at the Aeternus enclave on Tel in Chant. Tel is a CSRP incubator, a waterworld carved into corporate enclaves with no world government and jurisdiction split 4 ways. And a laboratory buried inside one of those enclaves answers to nobody a ministry inspector can readily reach. The continuity and clone research that would draw sanction on capital runs here instead, subsidized and practiced by the same program meant to rebuild a failing subsector. The Ministry of Science has wanted Aeternus curbed for years and has never managed it because the flag officers and nobles who would have to approve any move are wearing its implants, and the shipyards can't do without its materials. The Ministry of Information tracks it by a separate route, interested less in the science than in who has let Cogneta curate what they notice. Ling Standard Products competes with Aeternus in cybernetics and holds Durellian's contempt for regulation against him, while Hortalies at Sea watches from a distance, wary of what the augmentation trade is doing to the core elite it also lends to. To most commoners, the name means something nearer dread, the tool of decadent houses correcting their bloodlines and buying past death. And the salons trade in unconfirmed rumors that Strephon himself has put money in this. The dependence works in one direction only. Each fleet contract signed and each implant fitted to a senior officer makes the company harder to touch. So the deeper the Navy's reliance runs, the safer the backrooms get. And Aeternus has every reason to keep the fleet exactly as dependent as it is. For referees, Aeternus works at the table in 4 registers. As a patron, it hires through cutouts for work it can't be seen doing officially. Recovering a stolen prototype, or moving a clone shipment quietly off Tel. Or stealing the same from rivals. As an antagonist, it's what the travelers meet once they've been hired to expose the back rooms or extract someone or something the company would rather keep under wraps. You could use it as a temptation, where it offers the crew what nobody legitimate will: a skill chip, maybe even a cognita itself, a sculpting correction, a clone shell, at the price of a favor or even long-term servitude. You could use it as a recurring faction with its hidden tech used as the pressure underneath which props up an entire core campaign. The reason a rival is suddenly sharper than they were before, or why an ally is suddenly not acting themselves anymore. You could have every thread run back to Durellian and Aeternus, and beneath it all is the continued intrigue. How much cover do they have from the Imperium itself? And how real is that rumored personal stake Emperor Strephon is said to have taken in the company? That's our show for this time, everyone. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Next time, I think we'll continue our look at playing in this region of space, including a look at trade and shipping in the core, with details about the Sylean Main we heard so much about in this episode. And who exactly are the Syleans anyway? Plus, could you really make a Firefly-style campaign work here in this setting instead of out in the Spinward Marches? Until then, write the show at coresignalsmail@gmail.com or follow along on Blue Sky at signalsfromthecore.bsky.social. You can find this info in our show notes, along with a link tree to make it easy to locate the show online anytime. And if you've enjoyed the show, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And share with your fellow travelers. Please, it really helps the show out, keeps it growing, keeps me satisfied with doing it and carving out the time to do it every other week. But until next time, keep your clearance valid, your comms encrypted, and your grav line out of committee oversight. Stay sharp, travelers.